Hey y'all, I'm here to talk about the astrology for the week ahead, November 18th until November 25th. This week holds one of the biggest astrological events of the year, the final ingress of Pluto into Aquarius. And in this way, it's very much a week of thresholds. We're crossing the final Pluto threshold of Pluto's time with Capricorn definitively coming to the end and our time with Pluto in Aquarius beginning. So, as this William Blake illustration shows of this crossing into this liminal underworld like quality, this is really going on this week because, first and foremost, we have a big Pluto transit coming in right away. We have Pluto finally entering Aquarius for good without coming back to Capricorn on November 19th. This has been coming for a while. There's a lot more to say about this transit. In fact, I'm planning to make a video dedicated just to talking about this really important transit because Pluto will now be in Aquarius for over 20 years, roughly 20 years actually, until about 2043. At that time, it'll start going back and forth into Pisces. We've had it come into Aquarius a couple of times already, but each time, first it was only a couple months, few months, and then it came back to Capricorn. This year, Pluto's been in Aquarius for most of the year, but there was really something significant about the fact that we knew Pluto would come back to Capricorn from September until now, and that even though we were already starting the Pluto and Aquarius story, we weren't finally done with the Pluto and Capricorn story and events. And now we are. So it's a time to really deepen into reflection about everything that has come up for you, all these important lessons and virtues about yourself you've come into deeper contact with Pluto being in Capricorn. So many incredibly deep lessons that have come out of this transit. A lot of times when you hear popular people in astrology talking about this transit, you hear a lot about exposure of poisonous toxicity and systemic structures and all this greed and all these other things. But there's so many really deep lessons around personal empowerment and resilience that Pluto and Capricorn has brought up for all of us. And that's the part I'd really invite you to take in on a much deeper level here. The other thing, though, that's happening this week, it's not all about Pluto because there is a really significant Mercury cycle that we're coming into contact with. Mercury right now is slowing down. Mercury recently had its maximum elongation as an evening star. And each night this week, Mercury will get a little bit lower towards the horizon after the sun sets. Mercury will get a little bit slower. Mercury is also out of bounds in declination, which makes Mercury more kind of extreme, unrestrained, creative in many ways. A beautiful time to be really investigating things, really asking a lot of questions and going deeper with whatever research you're doing. But you're also going to start noticing this quality of something intensifying. Perhaps things are slowing down for you, but a lot of you are probably like me, just really busy, have a lot of stuff to be taken care of. But there might be some lessons coming up here with the Mercury retrograde where you're going to really have to focus in on certain areas of your life and take care of certain things. Some things sometimes come back around again that we have to deal with again during a Mercury retrograde. This week, as we know, though, that it's coming, really take care of business. What are some of those things on your to-do list that you've been putting off, especially around scheduling things, taking care of like paperwork? Sometimes there's those sort of mercurial ordering of paperwork and dotting all the T's and little tiny details of things that are not the most exciting part about Mercury, but are so important. And since we know the Mercury retrograde is coming, it's better just to take care of that stuff now. That's one of the things I always really try to focus in on with them when I know a Mercury retrograde is coming. For example, I've been putting off a little bit changing the oil in my car. I'm going to make sure I do that this week and make sure I get that taken care of. So this Mercury retrograde that's starting now will take us all the way until the middle of December on December 15th, which will be the next full moon that we have in Gemini. So we just had a full moon in Taurus. So there's something about in between these two full moons that this Mercury retrograde is going to come in. It's going to come in before the next new moon, and then as the moon waxes to fullness, Mercury will come to the end of its retrograde phase. So that's going to be an important element we'll talk a little bit more about. And so, of course, when Mercury goes retrograde, Mercury's not actually moving backwards. Mercury's just as close to us as it ever gets in its orbit. And right now, that full moon illuminated Mercury reaching maximum elongation, starting to slow down. So this week we're in this little section here as Mercury's coming closer and closer to us. And that intensification of Mercury getting closer to us is really amplified with Mercury actually stationing retrograde and not moving by a degree and really locking us into this portal of time that we go through of Mercury being at like 22, 23 degrees of Sagittarius and moving all the way back to like 6.5 or so degrees of Sagittarius. It will be after the next new moon in Sagittarius on December 5th that Mercury will reach that reanimation, regeneration point of its inferior conjunction. So there is, like this image shows, this sort of cocoon like threshold liminal passage that comes in during Mercury retrogrades where things are not the same on the other side, where it's this great time to change habits, change routines, really deepen into whatever mysterious process is underway for you. Really open to curiosity, open to not knowing everything that's going on, open to more of the sort of the mystery and what might emerge out of some of these processes. Mercury retrogrades can be actually very powerful times, and you can actually be productive. Right now, though, it is true that sometimes there are some Mercury issues that come up during the retrograde. And so, like I said, as the more this week you're kind of tuning into what some of those issues might be that are starting to draw your attention, you might already be getting a sense of what's going to really need your focus during this upcoming retrograde. So, the important thing about this week's astrology is that it is the week following the full moon in Taurus. And there was a lot to take in with this particular full moon that was conjoining Uranus, that had Saturn stationing at the same time. That combination, Saturn's been retrograde for months since back towards the end of June. You might have noticed that there was something that you've been working on that hadn't totally come into form yet during the Saturn retrograde, and then something about the combination of Saturn stationing and the full moon, being really electrified and amplified with that Uranian conjunction, that things have just really kind of come in more, and there's more of a force behind something coming through a lot stronger in your life right now that you really need to now attend to and manage more actively. That definitely has gone with some things that have happened for me around this full moon. But of course, this full moon was also sextile Neptune. It was trining that Pluto at the very, very end of Capricorn. So there's also something amazing about how this lunation was so Uranian and so potentially revelatory and so connected to Pluto at the end of Capricorn that really, again, highlights the ability to come into contact with the deeper meaning of the Pluto transit through Capricorn and really get more ready and open for what's going to be coming in with Pluto being in Aquarius. This week has a lot of important aspects that are coming in that are pretty significant aspects. But compared to some of the other weeks we've had this year, it's not quite as busy in terms of having, this overabundance of big planetary aspects coming into fruition. One of the main things today on November 18th has been the Mercury Jupiter opposition that's been building. But as I mentioned, the big centerpiece of this week is Pluto entering Aquarius on November 19th. And then in a couple of days after that, the sun going into Sagittarius and forming a sextile with Pluto so soon after the ingress. These days of the 19th through the 21st are going to be really profound in terms of connecting in with what is this new trajectory that's more solidly coming in for you with Pluto and Aquarius. After that, as we'll talk about, there is also this very nice supportive, grounding sextile between Venus and Capricorn and Saturn and Pisces that has mutual reception due to Venus being in the sign of Saturn and Saturn being in the exaltation of Venus. There's something about that pragmatic quality that's just kind of this layer in the background that's pretty supportive that can really help us tune in again to what are these issues related to Mercury that we're going to really be needing to deepen into with the upcoming retrograde. So on November 18th, the moon is in Cancer. This is a significant day just in the moon's monthly orbit because the lunar nodes are in early Aries and early Libra right now. So the moon in Cancer on November 18th is going to be forming a square aspect with the lunar nodes up at the northern bending. This means the moon has like reached its greatest height in latitude relative to the ecliptic and will start coming down. It's a dynamic turning point in the moon's monthly cycle, just a pivotal point of change. And so the combination of this with Saturn having just stationed direct, with that full moon lighting up Uranus, with Pluto at the final minutes of Capricorn, there's a lot of change in the air. We can feel it. And this moon is really perfect for picking that up. What is that change going on? It's a Cancer moon. The moon is in its home. It's sensitive. It can pick up the emotional currents of what's going on around us. And it can, being in Cancer, very quickly attune, flexibly shift as needed, make a dynamic change in whatever is going on in your life. There might be certain adjustments you're realizing you need to be making. At the same time, we have Mercury in Sagittarius forming an exact opposition with Jupiter in Gemini. They're in each other's signs. So they have mutual reception between them. One of the things that, this makes me think about in the United States with the recent election, there's just been an overabundance of inflated ideas in general, lots of pundits and people talking about, what this means or that means. One of the things I would just invite you at this time in general, which is going to be really important about the astrology of the next year, certainly pay attention to what your intuition is telling you and what's being revealed to you about the meaning of your life and the path forward. But especially in terms of these bigger collective changes and these bigger collective events and what we're being shown on the media about them, what everybody's telling us they mean. And, astrologers are predicting are going to absolutely happen in the next few years. Really embrace that quality of the mystery and the unknowing. There's going to be so much changing. And the Mercury Jupiter connection that's forming here is actually really important related to the upcoming Mercury retrograde, because this is only the first of a series of oppositions that Mercury is going to be forming with Jupiter. And there's a way that Jupiter and Saturn, they're coming into another square aspect about a month from now. And this Mercury retrograde cycle is also going to be connecting in with them. So because we know Mercury is going to go up a little bit forward, station retrograde, and come back, this is not just one pass of like a Mercury-Jupiter opposition. Whatever's going on with your mind, whatever visions you're getting about what you want to be working on, just embrace a quality of process and knowing that there's going to be more information coming. That's one of the key things about this aspect today. And the fact that we know Mercury is going to be stationing retrograde a week from now. Then what happens on Tuesday, on November 19th, is that dramatic entrance of Pluto into Aquarius. So it was back in 2023 from March 23rd until June 11th that we had that first initial ingress. That really went with a lot of the AI technology exploding and a lot of big questions about what the meaning of all this AI technology is going to mean. That was one of the things that was very noticeable about that first ingress. There was, of course, many other things going on with it. And then, like I said before, most of this year, from the end of January until the beginning of September, we've had Pluto in Aquarius. So you already have a sense of what are some of the initial storylines of this transit. But paying attention to this week is going to be important because this is going to be the first week that we have Pluto back in Aquarius, where, it's not going back to Capricorn. And again, especially related to some of these bigger collective events and power dynamics going on with world leaders and these different bigger, larger movements in the world. Pluto in Aquarius tends to bring lots of change, lots of decentering of those in power. Combined with the other aspects going on in astrology, we can expect even some of our basic conceptions of reality to likely be changing on large scale levels, especially combined with the Saturn Neptune that's starting to come into effect a little bit more and will be increasingly coming into effect. And that this full moon also set off. The type of disillusionment many are already starting to feel about the world is something we can expect to even deepen. But this disillusionment is going to be necessary. This disillusion is going to be necessary as part of whatever plutonic process is going to unfold. And so the way things look like they might be right now are unlikely to stay that way. And there's so much more to come. But honestly, to get ready. So if there is things about going on about the world that you are angry about right now and you do want to see change, this is a great time to just start formulating in your mind some of those initial plans and what you can do in your community with whatever that might be. Then on November 20th, we will have the moon leave Cancer and enter Leo. Now, towards the end of the moon's time in Cancer on November 19th, when Pluto goes into Aquarius, it's going to be significant because the moon will also be moving through a square with Chiron into a sextile with Uranus and a trine with Neptune and a trine with the sun. There's actually going to be a water triangle that can be really helpful for picking up a lot of the deeper inward emotional and just inner psychic kind of processes that are unfolding for you right now. It puts the moon back in a nice aspect with Uranus and whatever might have come out for you with that recent full moon. Then on November 20th, with the moon going into Leo, this is going to be a really significant change. So this day could be potentially dramatic with just some personal interactions and different things like that you might go through. Just keep that in mind. I mean, one thing with the moon moving into the fiery Leo sign, that's just going to naturally spark a lot of movement and this more fiery, kind of radiant type of dynamic being set off in the world. But it's especially powerful because the moon will go across a conjunction with Mars. And so the moon applying to Mars and then forming a conjunction with Mars and starting to separate from Mars for most of this day, sometimes that type of aspect can go with increased likelihood of getting angry or getting frustrated or saying some really cutting words to somebody. So just keep that in mind. Because Mars is starting to slow down and next month will actually station retrograde, there's this real intense quality of Mars stationing retrograde to oppose Pluto and Aquarius that is starting to build. And because Pluto has just gone into Aquarius, and then the moon basically moves from opposing Pluto into forming a conjunction with Mars, there's a window into this larger Mars Pluto storyline that's getting opened up here. So another really good day to just to be kind of paying attention to what that might be, finding some outlets for frustrations, maybe with some physical activity or whatever else it might be. Then on November 21st, we have the sun leaving that watery, inward, intense, penetrating sign of Scorpio into Sagittarius, the sign of Jupiter. Jupiter's in the opposite sign of Gemini, moving retrograde. This means we're starting to head into the Sun and Jupiter starting to form an opposition. And, Jupiter's going to be getting brighter and brighter in the night sky, coming closer and closer to us. It's going to pick up more of a pace, this more kind of visionary type of Sagittarian quality coming in. And we get that Sun immediately forming a sextile with Pluto. So this is one aspect that I really love because, I mentioned the day before, the moon's really setting off the Pluto Mars opposition in a pretty disruptive way that might feel uncomfortable or unsettling or just be upsetting for one reason or another. The sun here instead is going to be sextiling Pluto and then moving into a trine with Mars, which is much more supportive and I think will be helpful for tuning in more to how to do something productive with this Mars Pluto opposition. And you'll hear a lot of people talking negatively about the Mars Pluto opposition for good reason, because it can go with some difficult events in the world and big power plays. But it's also a transit that can be incredibly personally empowering and put you in touch with deeper reservoirs of desire and power and ambition that is actually good for you to come into deeper contact with. And so I like this aspect with the sun for that reason. Now, the moon is still in Leo, but the moon is actually moving through some nice aspects on this particular day also. So the moon will have moved away from that conjunction with Mars into a sextile with Jupiter, a trine with Chiron, and a trine with Mercury. So again, there's this really important Mercury Jupiter connection that's part of this upcoming Mercury retrograde. And this is a day where the moon is really going to be mediating them. So just like I mentioned that with the sun helping us tune into what can we get more productively out of this Mars Pluto opposition, the moon's doing the same with the Mercury Jupiter on this particular day, November 21st. So that's a really good day to be paying attention to that. The next day on November 22nd, which is Friday, on this day we have the moon going from Leo into Virgo. Now, one thing about this particular day is that when the moon is still in Leo before she gets to Virgo, she's going to form a square aspect with Uranus. So whatever revelations related to Uranus came out at that full moon, there might be another further activation of some of that material here on Friday. But then once the moon goes from Leo into Virgo, we're going to be coming into that last quarter moon when the moon is half light and half dark. And this is another pivotal turning point in the moon's monthly orbit and phases. It can be a very deeply contemplative time that can help you come into contact again with what needs your attention, what needs to be tempered. With the moon in Virgo entering the sign of Mercury these next few days, it's going to also really accentuate the ability to be tuning into what is Mercury bringing up and what is Mercury intensifying as Mercury is preparing to station. This is only a few days before the exact stationing of Mercury. So Mercury is already slowing down considerably, already starting to station, and already, really intensifying some particular issues and matters that really need our attention. So once the moon comes into Virgo and forms that last quarter square, it's going to really spark a lot for us around whatever that is. And then simultaneously on this day, we have Venus in Capricorn forming that sextile with Saturn in Pisces. This is a beautiful aspect to use in terms of whatever has been coming up for you in your life with Saturn stationing. If you have something around 12 degrees or the middle of Pisces or Virgo or Gemini or Sagittarius, I'm sure there's something really significant going on for you related to Saturn. But for all of us, the stationing of Saturn is naturally just going to bring up that Saturn principle, really demanding that we come more deeply into reality, especially with Saturn. It's often in terms of the limits that we're up against, whatever available time and space we have, what kind of boundaries that we have set up in our life right now. And so there's been an interesting tension with, that full moon with Uranus, maybe like potentially opening up some kind of idea that might go beyond the current limits that are in our life. And those limits are really important. The intersection between creativity and limitation is absolutely necessary. And we have to work within our limits, and those limits can actually catalyze our creativity. So this particular aspect on this day is going to be really nice, I think, for getting a sense of that and how to work with whatever's going on in our life here. With the Venus in Capricorn is great in terms of, grounding us, being able to help with planning and strategy. It's really one of the most helpful things going on in the astrology of this particular week. So the next day then on November 23rd, which is Saturday, that moon that's been in Virgo that formed that last quarter square with the sun will now move into an opposition with Saturn and then a trine with Venus. Now, in the Pacific time zone, this opposition between the moon in Virgo and Saturn in Pisces is happening around 7:23 p.m. Those in Eastern time zone, this will be more like 10:23, 10:30 on Saturday night. Those of you that might be farther out in a time zone, it's going to be something very, very different than this is here. But you might notice that whatever that sense of limits around Saturn that you're coming into contact with, that might feel a little bit more pressurized, and you might feel a little bit more of the obstacle or adversity of whatever that is as the moon's coming into form this exact opposition with Saturn. But the fact that the moon immediately leaves that opposition with Saturn and enters into a close trine with Venus in Capricorn makes me feel that whatever that is, there's something to get out of it, to really use as part of whatever it is you're developing in your life right here. And then at the same time, the moon, it's not going to be forming an exact square with Mercury right here, but it is heading towards a square with Mercury. And that's really important because at this point, as we come into Sunday, November 24th, Mercury is, for all intents and purposes, stationing retrograde. The exact station hasn't happened yet, but Mercury is barely moving right here. And so it's extremely powerful on Sunday, November 24th, that moon in Virgo in Mercury's sign forms first a square aspect with Jupiter, then a square aspect with Mercury. So these days of Saturday the 23rd and Sunday the 24th, the moon is moving from opposing Saturn into squaring Jupiter, into squaring Mercury. This is a big storyline of development that's going to be playing out here in the next month that involves Mercury, Saturn, and Jupiter. And the moon is really kicking it all up, bringing up our attention to what are these issues, whatever they are, whatever you're starting to notice here come up that you got to really pay attention to and deal with. With the moon in Virgo, in Mercury's sign, there's going to be a way to work with this. And tune into whatever that is, because whatever is happening here, we know with Mercury stationing to go retrograde and come back to contact Jupiter and Mercury, Jupiter and Saturn again during its retrograde phase, that whatever the story is, there's going to be more twists and turns coming. We're going to be deepening into some process that involves Mercury and Sagittarius, Jupiter and Gemini, Saturn and Pisces. And so I love the fact actually that the moon in Virgo is contacting them all right here. Now, what's also happening at the same time is that the moon is forming a trine to Uranus and Taurus and an opposition with Neptune and Pisces. I made a mistake on the slide. I wrote sextile Neptune. I have no idea why I did that, but it's not a sextile with Neptune. It's an opposition with Neptune. The opposition with Neptune, like the opposition to Saturn, what this is doing is it's connecting us into this much larger story of Saturn and Neptune that's playing out. That definitely can go with a lot of disillusionment, but it's also a beautiful time when you're going through this disillusionment, letting the death of old dreams and ideals happen and reawakening and coming into deeper contact with what are these new dreams and new visions that you really want to bring into reality. And the moon simultaneously trining Uranus here is going to be helpful in terms of inspiration and giving you some ideas of what that might be. This is all just happening on one day. It's all very powerful in terms of the stationing of Mercury. And so on November 25th, next Monday, that is the day that Mercury will finally station retrograde in Sagittarius, and this retrograde process will begin. Now, when this happens, the moon will be in Libra. And the moon once the moon enters Libra, the moon will immediately form a trine with Pluto and then move across a conjunction with the south node into a sextile with the sun and a sextile with Mars. So interestingly, this Mars Pluto opposition that's also building here, and it's this other really big storyline going on right now. The moon is contacting this and mediating it. And this is all happening as the moon is coming across her own south node. So I mentioned at the beginning of this week, on November 18th, the moon is in Cancer up at the northern bending, forming a square with the lunar nodes. And so whatever is starting to happen that the moon is stirring up at the beginning of this week, at this point, it's all come down and it's coming across that south node. It's coming across the ecliptic. It's a time of release and emptying things out. Some things might need to be let go, but some things we might also be really deepening into something that's being developed here that is something that we're going to really take with us. And we are going to be further developing not only across this next month, but beyond. But the fact that that moon is making the harmonious contacts with Mars and Pluto at the same time definitely makes me feel into the fact that if there's some really difficult relational things that have been going on or parts about yourself and how that, whether it's connected to some of the big collective current events of power dynamics and world leaders and all this crazy stuff that's going on in the world with that Mars Pluto, it might be a process of just like letting go of some of that to refocus on, what's really important to you. If you've been feeling disempowered in a particular relationship, there might be something else here to be kind of like letting go of whatever ways that you've been in a relationship that hasn't been working for you, or perhaps you've realized you've been too full of hubris, or you've been too much trying to get your own way. Maybe there's a sense of more humility that you need to come into contact with here, or, that you realize there's a ways that you need to be listening more to the needs of other people in your relationship field and be listening into what's going on with them and how are they seeing things. Just keep all of that in mind. It's a lot of complicated astrology going on right now at this time period, and it's just going to continue to be that way, honestly, for the next few years. We're entering this really incredible time of astrology, but I think it is exciting in terms of all the change that can happen. So this week, as we're coming into this Mercury retrograde period, it's just one small step in this much larger process that is unfolding. I'll be back with some more videos talking about the meaning of the upcoming Mercury retrograde in more detail. So stay tuned to that. Otherwise, my books are open right now. If you'd like to schedule a consultation with me, I'd love to see you and work with you and talk to you about your chart and what's going on with your astrology. And in case you're watching this and you're not a member of my Patreon, check out my Patreon and the community there and what you can gain as becoming a member. Otherwise, for you, those here that are supporting me on Patreon, thank you again for your support. It means the world to me. But that's it for now. I'll see y'all next time.